Good morning, and thank you so much for joining us on this last morning of our last day of the Stockholm Forum. My name is Cedric de Kooning. I'm a research professor with the Norwegian Institute for International Affairs, also an advisor with Accord, but I'm actually here because I'm a board member of Conducive Spaces for Peace, which is one of the partner organizations hosting our event here this morning, together with the Conflict Prevention and Peace Forum of the Social Science Research Council, as well as the Civil Society Platform for Peacebuilding and State Building, and the Robert Bosch Foundation. So we are all joined forces to organize this event here this morning. We are focusing on how best to support locally led environmental peace building. And we have a fantastic panel that is going to shed light and give perspectives and from their various vantage points on the topic. We only have 1 hour and a lot to share, so I'm going to try and go into that as soon as possible. But just to remind us of the frame of our discussion. So we all know that for peace to be sustainable, it has to emerge from within. At the same time, if we're talking about peace, it means that there's been some kind of challenges which have disrupted perhaps local communities, local societies, to the extent that there's a need for some form of support to help bring peace about. So we have this dilemma of, on the one hand, needing peace to emerge from local processes, at the same time, need for some form of perhaps catalytic facilitation or support. And how to do that, how to support locally led peace processes without somehow disrupting that process or causing harm, or taking over the space. That's really the dilemma that we're trying to address this morning. So I'm going to introduce the panelists as I ask them questions, so as to save time and not introduce everybody first and then go back to them again. So I'm going to start on my far right with James Shalua, who's the Executive Director of the Platform for Dialogue and Peace in Liberia. James is known to us all as Jimmy. So Jimmy, I want you to perhaps kick us off by telling us a little bit about your work, your peace-building work in Liberia, and sharing with us some examples of how your work is affected by climate change or environmental degradation, so that we understand a little bit when we talk about environmental peace building, what kind of work are we talking about, and how is your work affected by these changes? So over to you, Jimmy.
Good morning. Thank you, Cedric. Normally we say ladies first, but this time I will take you first. So it's good being a part of this very great panel. I'm just going to see how much I can do within the 2 or 3 minutes given me. There are too many things to come up, but I will try as much as possible. So I work for an organization called the Platform for Dialogue and Peace, and we are based in Monrovia, Liberia, but we are a part of a global platform called the Civil Society Platform for State Building and Peace Building. And so I wouldn't go into what we do, but as you can hear, Platform for Dialogue and Peace is about peace building. CSPPS is about peace building. And the kind of work we do involves research and working with local community to be able to find solutions for problems affecting the community. We are not experts. We are basically facilitators. So we go to community, provide the kind of atmosphere that is needed. What we do sometimes can become challenging because there are different stakeholders within communities. For example, the issue of power dynamics. For example, that people considered to be spoilers who would not necessarily be brought to the peace table. So some of our work to negotiate bringing in people of this nature to the peace table. And as I shared my I don't know, 2 minutes or so, can you just scream up for me something I wanted to give you to have an impression? So in Liberia, I would take one of the affected slums called West Point. As you can see from the far left, West Point 2014 was just like what you see here today. But now, 2021, the new picture of West Point clearly shows the effect of climate change. Close to 30% of that whole community has been taken in by sea erosion. There's so much displacement from people who live there. What is in fact more important, and the kind of work we do with funding from Women, Peace and Humanitarian Fund, is to see how we support women. And we notice that this is a fishery community. And because of climate change, lots of the work and income that our target group really generate from their work, they are not receiving that anymore. So we see a high rate of gender-based violence taking place. Again, when they were earning their own income, they at least have the opportunity of resisting some of what they used to go through. So I wouldn't come here and tell you boldly that climate change is not affecting our work, but indirectly, like some people say, it has a multiplier effect. So as peace builder, we are working with vulnerable communities, including women and sometimes marginalized folks, like we call at-risk youth. And because of the effect of climate change, we see migration to higher areas of the county that causing so much pressure on very limited social resources. Another thing I'd like to share with you in terms of our work, during the Ebola crisis, there have been so much that went on in the 3 countries, Sierra Leone, Guinea, and Liberia. And as some of you probably followed the event, you will realize when the Ebola started, the government immediate response was to deploy the military. Question was, can the M16 shoot a sort of a virus like Ebola? Clearly telling you there's a mismatch in terms of how we address some of these crises. It was through community mobilization, through the engagement of communities, working with our partners, like Civil Society Platform for State Building and Peace Building, with our colleagues in Sierra Leone, in Guinea and Liberia, undertaking research to understand what is it that local people are resisting the instruction from their government. And these kind of information were brought to the table and help government to understand that it's not much about using a sort of militarized approach, but it's about allowing people to understand the virus and how it affects them, even though they may have their own distrust of the government. Similarly, too, we also managed to work with, again, thanks to the Swedish government, with funding to work around what we call a project called Framework for Assessing Resilience. And this framework was intended to understand how local people themselves address stresses. And because the research approach was more like facilitatory and not coming in as experts, we're not extracting the knowledge, people were able to understand that they themselves have their own solution. And we, as the facilitator, realized the solutions are with the local people. And I'm saying this because the result of that research has been published. And if I would quote the Minister of Interior, that you call Internal Affairs in Liberia, who said it was his first time seeing a study that did not focus so much on conflict factors, but what united the people. So I'm just saying this because we are now being confronted with something called climate change, which has been around for a very long time. But the solution to address these kind of problems should be given and coming from the people. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jimmy. And we have amongst our panelists people representing donors and private foundations and research, but also Jimmy and our next panelist, Valnora Edwin, who's the director of the African Women Leaders Network in Sierra Leone, who are also representing a national and locally led environmental peacebuilding and organizations. So Valnora, maybe before we turn to the others, can I ask you as well to tell us a little bit about the work that your organization does and that you're involved in, and how that is affected by climate change and environmental factors?
Thank you, Cedric, and thanks. It's a pleasure to be here and to share from our perspectives what we do in Sierra Leone. So not necessarily working on climate change per se, but some of the interventions we do or the issues that emerge definitely helps to address issues around climate change. So I work for a women's organization just the past couple of years, but on a wider scale, I do a lot of governance interventions. And I'll be coming from that perspective in sharing some of the things we do. But with regards the issues around climate change, what we are battling with now is high level of deforestation. There's a lot of sand mining ongoing, and you have a significant amount of rural-urban migration, which creates a lot of stress on the facilities we have within the city. So we do have a lot of slums, and these slums are mostly in the hilltops, in the mountains, in the western area, the capital city, and also in the waterways close to the sea areas. So what we experienced over the years has been late rainfall, which affects agriculture. But then this year we're having very early rains and very heavy rains that we usually experience around July, August. So now in May we're experiencing that. We assume, yes, a country like Sierra Leone is very hot, but we're experiencing more intense heat. The humidity gets higher. So in December, we have the monsoon wind, which we call the dry Harmattan winds, and it used to be much cooler from our own side. Humidity is lower. But within the last few years, it's getting quite humid. So you're having like up to 32 degrees with very high humidity. And in as much as we might want to link that to the wider global actions, but there are also what the actions we do as well as a country. And that also affects access to water supply, which is what I would like to share the examples of what we have done at that level. So it becomes a competition to have access to water, especially in the capital city. And you see, especially youths and especially girls, maybe even as young as 10 or 12, midnight, 1 a.m., 3 a.m. in the morning, trying to access water so that, and they can do that prior to going to school and doing everything else. And so we had reports of gender-based violence, that some of these girls were raped. We don't have enough data to verify that, but we received these reports, and we heard that there were some conflicts, because if you're moving from one location, if somebody else is coming from another neighborhood and trying to access water in this neighborhood, I mean, there's a territorial thing because it's limited. So you have these fights. So there's a low threshold of conflict, but there was a need to intervene because we're aware that conflict starts at the community level and it could escalate. So a couple of organizations, there were press releases, there were media engagements, and there was extensive engagement with the water management entity. And subsequently, the response, which I think was good, is they installed these 10,000-liter water tanks in specific areas, and the community people had the responsibility to monitor how that happened. So definitely that sort of helped to quell the issue around the disputes that were emerging. I'd also like to share, but probably, though not from a climate change perspective, but how communities have been able to respond to COVID. So even if we look at it from a gender perspective, you find that at the community level, we didn't have lockdowns and extensive measures as you had. But there was a need to respond to some of the issues, and because of the experience of Ebola, we had to ensure that it didn't escalate to that level. So you had women who were in the communities, and because we had, I think once or twice we had lockdowns, they were able to get whatever little resources they had and to share with even more vulnerable groups and communities. The message there is there are structures at the community level. There are mechanisms at the community level to respond to crises, to respond to emerging issues. So the conversation might not be seen from a climate change perspective, but when these issues do emerge, there are community structures in place that help to quell the situation and it doesn't escalate. And it's important that we acknowledge these innovative and creative ways of managing conflict, of addressing challenges. Last point would be, we must be aware Sierra Leone is considered as a fragile state, and so state capacity to manage some of these issues is not at an appreciable level. So you do need community structures, you do need community interventions where people understand the context, where there are custodians of the systems and the processes to be able to intervene when it is required. Thank you.
Thank you so much. It was such an interesting example of how, climate change and environmental stress cause social tensions and forms of violence, and the steps that can be taken and has been taken in that case. But as we are focused on this question of how best to support locally led environmental peace building, can I ask you first of all, Nora, and then Jimmy, you as well, what kind of support do you find useful? And are there also examples that you can give about support that you find harmful or less useful?
I think the support that we would need at this point is we have the capacity, we have the knowledge, we have the experience, but what happens is we do not always have the finances to move some of these thoughts, some of these interventions, to deepen them as would be required. So some of these interventions or issues that I've shared were on a very low budget scale, but if you need to escalate that, you need to expand and deepen that. Those are the sort of things we need. We also, within a framework of CSPPS, one of the values of that is we learn innovative ways. We learn from what is happening in other contexts, and we'll be able to adapt some of those within our context as well, and also to share. So these are the sort of the spaces and the forums that would be helpful for us. What could be some of the issues that could be harmful? The one-size-fits-all approach doesn't work. We need to refocus our lens to understand that we're all coming from different contexts, different backgrounds. And as I've stated, the knowledge is there, the systems are there, the structures are there. They might not be what we are familiar with or what we think is acceptable, but it works. And I think that's the most important point.
Thanks so much, Nora. We have some lovely sofas there, so please feel free to take a seat there as well if you need a seat. Thank you so much for your engagement. Jimmy, over to you, but let me just also ask in the interest of time, 2-3 minutes.
Okay.
Thanks, Jimmy.
Thank you. I think Venera have already touched on some of the supports we would need to work together, but I think in my earlier intervention, I talked about collaboration with different groups. For example, I talked about work done together with CSPPS during the Ebola crisis, and of course, the work done together with Interpeace on the framework for assessing resilient intervention as well. Clearly telling you that these kind of collaborations are very helpful. We don't have all the technological understanding of some of these issues, but we definitely see working together, having sometimes experts and practitioner sharing at a non-state level can be very useful. We also see that there have been so many publications and sometimes good recommendations about how to work with civil society and non-state actors. And one of those publications was something in 2019, the study that was published by the EU around calling societies outside metropolis. I think the emphasis there is a concrete and consistent effort should be made to work with non-state actors when we are addressing some of these issues. And I think this is something we should be able to adapt and continue with. We also see that it's important that when we are talking in terms of addressing some of these problems, as much as we from a fragile state and our government have limited capacity to address some of these things, we expect to see the international communities, to some extent, asking them to become the kind of duty bearers who they claim to be at the international level when they're signing treaties. Because sometimes there's a tendency of affixing signature to some international treaties, and then back home is business as usual. So we'll monitor some of these things. We have to make sure we are consistent with what we are saying, especially with the issue of climate change chipping in so fast like this. We also don't want to see that practice, and there's the info addressing the issue of harmful. I don't want to call it harmful. But we don't want to see that extractive mentality where we see people flying in and coming, just collect data, and sometimes even the local people really don't have understanding of what these people were doing here. You go into some villages today, you see so much signpost, different, out of USAID, this one, but there's not anything you can account for. This kind of invasion, as somebody call it, of local spaces, really will not address some of the issue. And climate change issue that we're addressing is so urgent. So we need realism, we need openness, we need collaboration, and we need real commitment. These are things I think we can say for now.
Thank you so much to both of you. Let me turn next to one of the practitioners we have with us. I'm going to turn to Elizabeth Selwood on my left here. She's the chief of the Environmental Security Unit at the United Nations Environmental Program based in Nairobi. And Elizabeth is known to all of us as Lizzie. So Lizzie, I know you've worked specifically on implementing some locally led climate adaptation and peacebuilding work in Sudan and Nepal. Can you share some of your lessons from that work and other work that you think are relevant for our discussion?
Sure, thank you. And what a nice introduction, because I think a lot of the things that the two colleagues have shared from their practice is consistent with what we've been trying to do. For the last 5 years, we have worked with the European Union on a partnership for climate change and security, which had some global components, trying to develop guidelines and good practices for linking climate adaptation and peace building. And we did 2 pilot initiatives at local level, one in Nepal and one in Sudan, to test approaches and to try and see whether the guidelines were effective and working. One of the characteristics of both of these efforts is that they were that we worked with local implementing partners who, in fact, were the lead. And I think, to your point, Eleanor, the point that one size fits all doesn't work. We are very much aware that in the implementation of those, we were heavily reliant on the local knowledge that our partners had, and continue to feed in terms of their understanding both of the environmental context and the conflict dynamics in those localities. A couple of key points from those. One is that we built and maintained strong partnerships both with local civil society organizations and with local government. And one of the purposes, the stated objectives, was to build the capacity of both of those organizations, so that not only did we learn from their experience, but also that was key to sustainability of the work. One of the other lessons was that we very deliberately combined the soft activities of local trust building, natural resource management, introduction of new processes, for example, for better natural resource management, community committees and community intergovernmental committees for natural resource management with the more traditional and sort of mainstream climate adaptation approaches like distributing seeds and introducing climate resilient infrastructure. And the knitting of those together was a very deliberate part of the design of the programs. One of the things that we found in both was that the work we did with local government has improved the relationship between both within communities, but also between communities and local government. And I think in the Sudan example, that's been incredibly important and interesting that those relationships between communities and local government in the management of natural resources have continued to improve in the 5 years of the project, despite the acute instability that has occurred at national level in Sudan. And I think that is one very important lesson for us, because we're working in many fragile contexts, that sometimes these local level initiatives can be more durable than efforts that focus on national level in, where our national interlocutors change very regularly. So very, very positive outcomes, both in terms of climate adaptation and improved livelihoods, but also in terms of community peace building and trust building in both contexts. We have quite documented this work quite well now, and the guidelines that we've developed during those projects are also available. We're looking forward to using some of the practices that we've developed and trying to apply them also on transboundary ecosystems in the next phase of the work. Thanks.
Thanks so much. And let's focus a bit more on knowledge and what we've learned from some of these experiences. I'm going to turn next to Dr. Emily Dupois, who's on my right. She's a professor of international relations at the Universidad San Francisco de Quito in Ecuador. And Emily has been doing some research on transboundary water management in the Andes. So I would really like for you to share some of your research and some of the knowledge that you've gained from your research in this area with us.
Thank you very much. And it's so nice to share different contexts and perspectives there. So I would like, as Cedric said, to present you some examples from the Andes, from a study we led between the Conflict Prevention and Peace Forum in partnership with CONDESAN, which is a regional NGO in the Andes, the consortium for the sustainable development of the Andean region. And we tried to investigate, to research on different transboundary basins case studies between Colombia and Ecuador, Mira-Mataje Basin, between Ecuador and Peru, and between Peru and Bolivia. And we wanted to focus on the concept of water security and hydrodiplomacy. So it's not only about talking about climate security, but to focus more precisely on water, because we know that water is one of the main issues linked to climate change, exacerbation, impacts, and tensions. No? But on the other side, I would like to highlight that we found a lot of peace building and collaboration examples. So the idea is not only to focus on conflict and tensions, but as the colleagues said, to see that some concrete examples, initiatives and structures are already existing and at the community level, at the local level. So I would like to share 2 or 3 concrete examples. For example, in Lake Titicaca, which is shared between Peru and Bolivia, we have a lot of water stress, of tensions, because of the construction of infrastructure, mining activities, or the contamination of the lake because of different activities. But on the other side, the communities in both parts of the basin are trying to put in place collaboration initiatives, because at the national levels of governments, it's not so easy to collaborate right now, but at the community level, it's working. So, for example, a few years ago, they've created the network of women defending water, and they have received capacity building to know how to manage technology to monitor water quality in the Lake Titicaca. So this is a concrete example. Another one I would like to share is between Ecuador and Colombia. We know there are a lot of issues because of narco trafficking, migration, mining activities, also putting pressure on natural resources, water availability, and obviously in the context of climate change, this is going to be worse in the future. No? So a concrete example, again, of collaboration and good practices is that different actors, civil society actors, local NGOs there, the international community also, and decision makers have created a binational information platform. It's called Wiki, like Wikipedia, Mira Mataje. And so it's a collaborative platform. So anybody who have some information on natural resources, water availability, climate change on this border can upload the information on the platform. And this is so important because we know that access to information and knowledge is key in enhancing environmental peace building. No? Yeah, so that's all for now. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And that was such a good reminder that, especially, I think one of the things we learned from the environmental peacebuilding literature is that most communities actually cooperate under stress, not necessarily go into conflict. But it needs support, it needs enabling support, it needs mechanisms, and it needs information. So thank you so much for sharing that. I'm going to turn next to Nille Gray Olsen. She's a senior advisor with the Department of Migration, Stabilization and Fragility in the Danish Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And Nille, so you are representing, in a sense, one of the bilateral donors and governments that fund and support the kind of support we're talking about when we talk about support for locally led environmental peace building. So it'd be interesting to hear from you, what kind of principles or considerations do you take into account when you make decisions about funding and supporting locally led environmental peace building?
Yes, thank you, and thank you for the organizers for inviting me to participate in this panel. I think it's a very important discussion. At the Danish MFA, we are already and have been for many years been supporting local peace building, conflict prevention, and local leadership. Can we do it better? Yes, we probably can, and we are constantly trying to as well. We're constantly trying to improve the work, how we work internally and with partners, to smoothen procedures, to ensure greater flexibility of funding, greater adaptability of programs, to ensure that we have a risk-willing funding available for local peace building is a priority, such as core funding, as unearmarked funding, but also by improving our conflict analysis. That is one of our core priorities, making sure that that we support actors on the ground and that we have updated knowledge of the context and the conflict drivers. In particular, the focus of the past years on the humanitarian development peace nexus is, I think, one of the. I mean, it's at the core of what we're focusing on at the moment, and I think there's a great. I think we are on the right path here. I think we are having buy-in from UN agencies, from bilateral donors, to to try and improve the way that we work, to ensure that we that we collaborate, that we work with local actors, that we put local peace builders, local actors in the center of what we do, that we focus on coordination amongst ourselves. I think that's a path right now, there's a trend, there's momentum to go down this road, and I think that's definitely an upside when we talk about local peace building, that there is a dedication to try and do this, and yes, it's very difficult for everybody to work within the nexus, but there's definitely a movement that we need to push. We all have different agendas and different procedures, so it's a challenge, but I think that we're on the right path here. When we talk about climate security, I think the working with the HDP nexus is even more important. An example is one of our projects in Mali, where we are working with local level peace building. It is very local, it's about information sharing, as Emily was mentioning, where we are trying to basically put people together and get them to discuss. And it's producing good results. I think one of the issues is that when the dry season again comes the year after, the conflict starts again. So in the end, this is not sustainable. Yes, you can put people together, you can get them to solve conflicts, but the root causes are still there. The climate change is still there. They still lack water, so it comes again and again. So this is where the HDP nexus becomes important, because we need to link what we do with local peace building up with new technology, with private companies, with the development actors, to ensure that we can counter the root causes, that we can actually do our utmost to make sure that the issue with water does not create conflict when the next dry season arrives. In terms of collaboration, of equitable collaboration on the ground, just to follow up of what was said, I think this is also something that we've prioritized and we continue to prioritize. Working with local partners is at the core of how we have been working for many years. I think in terms of ensuring equitable collaboration, having long-term partners, working through partnerships is the only way forward to ensure that the relationship with partners is trust-based. Of course, at the ministry, we cannot have direct partnerships with local level actors. We do not have the resources to manage that many contracts. So we have to work through international organizations. But we do prioritize that they do not self-implement, that they work with local partners. And that what we can do from our side is ensuring that we have long-term funding, flexible funding, and make sure that that we give the best framework for our partners to actually have these long-term trust-based partnerships. I'll stop here and give the word.
Thank you so much, Nilla. And I think part of what you sketched as well is this challenge of simultaneously responding to crisis, but also working in the medium to long term to try and change some of the dynamics that cause those crises at the same time. And I think that's particularly challenging. Let me turn to Atje Drexler, who's our last panelist, who's the Senior Vice President of Global Issues for the Robert Bosch Foundation. Atje, I guess as a private foundation, you perhaps have more freedom and maybe more risk adverse than governments can be. But how do you approach supporting locally led environmental peace building?
Yeah, thank you for having me on this panel, and thank you for the question, Cedric. Yes, I think you're right in supposing that we have more freedom and flexibility in a certain sense. When I was talking to Neil earlier, I said, well, as long as it is legal, we can basically do most things that we would like to do in a way.
I just want to move you a bit closer for
okay.
our online audience.
I'll move closer to the microphone myself. That might be easier than moving the microphone. So yes, we can basically do and work both what we want to do and how we would like to do it, as long as we fit within the legal frameworks of the country that we are registered in and the countries that we work in. And that can be a challenge because they may be contradictory. But apart from that, we could potentially take more risks, and many foundations do. I don't consider the foundation I work for as particularly risk-taking, but we're on our way, and we have started to move into that direction when we decided to work on locally led peace building a little bit more. And I could very well relate to something Malnora said earlier, that if you really have to look for the structures and mechanisms that are there, and that people do not necessarily call locally led environmental peace building. People may self-identify as community organizers or community activists or just community as a community, women's groups, but what they do will be both environmental and peace building. So one thing that I think is crucial for all donors, but private donors in particular, is not to use a language that people don't understand what you're looking for. So calling it environmental peace building may be nice here in Stockholm, but it may not be very helpful if you're trying to reach out to people who actually do the work. And that is part of what I think is the most crucial part for private donors, is to be aware of the power imbalance that you work in, and address the power asymmetry. We were talking about equitable collaborations earlier, and it's such a lovely term. But I think even no matter how hard you try, you will always have some kind of asymmetry in it. And unless you're willing to face that and deal with it with your partners, you're probably just perpetuating it and glossing it over. So what does that mean in sense of how do we do it? I think a lot of it is a part of an attitude. So adapting humility as a principle, centering learning from the partnership and learning from each other, rather than have local partners report to you. Develop a self-perception where you as a donor say, well, I'm learning from the more knowledgeable because they are where the issues are. We are in Germany, so we may have some issues with climate change ourselves, but that is not the point here. And then there's some very practical things. If you want to do this well, you have to change the way your whole organization works. It does not suffice if you have your program staff who know all about peace building, change their mindset. Unless you sort of drag along your accountants and your controlling people and your M&E people, the way of working will not change. And I think in supporting locally led peace building, environmental or whatever it may be, the how you fund may even be more important than the what, because you need the trust-based, flexible funding. You need to discuss what is learning versus reporting. So we are experimenting with, do we actually need a written report? Or wouldn't it be much nicer if we just, had a phone call or a video conference or even a meeting, if possible, like every 4 weeks, and discuss what has happened, what have our partners learned, what have we learned from them, what are other things that we have heard from that may be interesting. So that is something that we can do. Say, do we actually need that? Do we actually need a financial report that is by budget lines, or do we trust, do we implement and discuss with our partners what kind of safeguarding measures do they want to take and need to take in order to make sure that the money is well spent, and then we just proceed with a lump sum grant. It's still, for us, early stage and baby steps, so I wouldn't say that we are there yet, but I think in the trust-based philanthropy movement, I see a movement towards that direction. And as I said, it is about shifting the power. It's not about retaining it. So anything that can help shifting that power to local actors
will help us also to see the things that we cannot see and actually to be more impactful. And this is where I see the potential for philanthropic donors to understand why they need to do this, because we are all about growing our impact. And if we don't take successful practices into the account that are already there, we'll never get there. Thank you.
That was so interesting. As somebody who's worked in this field for a number of years, it's very rare that I've actually heard those kind of sentiments expressed in ways that manifest practically, because we all share the ideals, but then we know how often those are wrecked by the reality of the way the money flows and the way it has to be reported on and the way we measure results. And so really, really interesting. Thank you very much for sharing that. And thank you to all of you for being very self-responsible for the time, because that means we have about 15 minutes for discussion, which I wasn't sure that we would have. So that's fantastic. The floor's open. Now the audience, our participants, you also need to be responsible and be as short as possible with your questions, and then we'll ask the panelists to answer only one question each. So choose the questions selectively so that we can have a discussion. Okay, over to you in the corner. And please introduce yourselves. So until the red light goes on. Okay.
Is green now, I guess. Okay. Sorry about that. So Diane Scheinberg from the Peace Building Fund. My question is, how have you been able to work as well with local peace building organizations, but more informal networks? This is something that we at the fund are trying to do now from a cross-border basis in the Liptako-Goma region, and working on a small grant facility that is actually also recognizing the fact that a lot of the critical change agents and local peace builders are actually not part of an organization, or are maybe an informal network of youth agents, women's leaders that are not registered. So we factor that in our grant-making process in a very risky, innovative way to actually keep a percentage of funding to go to those actors. So I wanted to hear from you if you've done this, what has worked, what has not worked, and if you have any lessons to share, because we are piloting this right now and wanted to hear your thoughts on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I was on the advisory group of the Peace Building Fund in 2012 to 2014, and nothing like this was on the cards then. So great to see also innovation happening there. Yeah. Sarah.
Thanks, Cedric, and thanks to all of you for your interventions. I'm in a bit of an awkward position, but it's okay. Thank you. But first, a question to Jimmy. So I was wondering if you could give us some concrete examples about how facilitation moved people from the perspective of we're experiencing conflict or tension to more solution-oriented. So what is it about facilitation that creates that shift? And then to Valnora, so you talked about local structures, like people have local structures and mechanisms to manage the crises and the problems that they're facing. I'm wondering in this context where we're experiencing more and more crises, sort of how much can they handle, and how can we collectively, whatever organization whatever perspective you take, how can we support that? And then to Lizzie, you talked about trust building as part of these projects that you're implementing. Could you talk a little bit more about how you do that through those projects? And yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Farah. And there was a question. Yeah.
Sorry, just a quick one. Susanna Alfonsson Challenges Forum. Really interesting to hear about these good examples of these local initiatives and how they can be more effective than a national level. And I was interested, is there possibly any conflict with that? Could it be like working on one level could counteract the other one? Is there any conflict between national versus local level? Seems more effective on the local one.
Yeah, thank you so much. Good morning. My name is Mary Barikungeri. I'm the director and founder of Rwanda Women's Network. This is a very interesting panel because it gives us quite a number of perspectives. My quick question, since we have a very short time, it's very exciting. I want to first put one to my sister from Sierra Leone to tell us concretely how you hope to engage all of us, women who are running networks at the community level, with a focused agenda of transforming our societies and influencing policymakers. How you, as an African in networks, should we be engaging in the African Union? Because our struggle is to get there. So my other questions is to the Danish MFA. Coming from Rwanda, I'm very excited to hear what you are doing in terms of supporting locally led initiatives. As you are speaking, back of my mind, I'm hearing you, government, and many other governments sending us some of the asylum seekers. Today, if ever my government and your government do agree, I want to let you know that we are positioning ourselves as women's rights organization to send a message, clear message, to begin to have an engagement with those refugees when they're on the ground. Simply because we are very interested in understanding the women's rights issues around those refugees so that we can be arms up to make sure that women are well taken care of. So we are eyeing you, we are eyeing our government to be able to see how we can get engaged so that as we are talking of transitional, we make sure that we are also part and parcel of the conversation.
Thank you very much. I'm going to stop you there. Thank you so much. I'm going to stop you.
She said very fantastic things I need to comment on.
Well,
the private sector lady. Anyway, I will catch up with her.
Yeah, please do. Thank you so much.
What she's bringing on the table is quite new and fresh. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Sorry, I just want to give other people a chance as well, but I love your name, Wonder Woman. If you can be 30 seconds, last two questions. Please go.
Thank you, Laura Mir from Conciliation Resources. There's so much of what's been said that's really chimed with conversations we've been having internally with our partners and with a number of you in this room as well over the last couple of years. And I wonder, these are conversations, I think, within the peacebuilding sector. We really do understand the importance of locally led processes, but with the climate crisis, meaning we're interacting with a wider group of stakeholders often, needing to interact with more humanitarian actors, development actors, but also private sector interests. How do we make sure these conversations around the importance of locally led processes and all the different challenges that's been said around what that actually means in practice, how do we make sure those are taken into those other spaces? Thanks.
Hi, can you hear me? My name is Adelia Sugar from the Berkow Foundation. My question is to you, Emily, about the sharing of information. We've learned that the solutions oftentimes are already embedded in the communities, and it's much more about facilitating the cross-semination of solutions. So one aspect is monitoring information, sharing it, making it accessible. What is your experience of communities accessing actually this information, especially if they don't use the jargon we tend to use, or maybe don't use the digital space in a way that we use them? Thank you.
Thank you so much, and sorry for rushing you all. We've got 10 minutes now to go back to the panel. I'm going to start from Atja and end with Jimmy. So if you want to take one question, or if you have to two, please go ahead.
Yes, thank you. So many interesting questions to discuss. I think that we would have needed a much longer session for that. And hopefully we can catch up with all of you who have questions that they couldn't place now. I'd like to comment on the first question on not organized informal networks. I don't have a solution for that either. It's tricky. And I think it's still very much needed that those that want to fund these kind of networks put their heads together and say how we can do it. I think there are some examples of supporting informal or individual, informal networks or individual people to form collectives, cooperatives, so an easy form of of organizing where someone has access to, you know, a bank account and some kind of legal structure, not necessarily all of them, but I must admit that we haven't worked with those and are still trying to collect information on how this can be done. But I'd love to continue this discussion on how we can all do this better.
Yes, I'll address the lady from Rwanda's question about our discussions with your government. As far as I'm concerned, we do not have any fixed agreement yet. I'm not dealing with that particular discussions, so I'll not go further into that. What I will say is that I know that Rwanda has been extremely hospitable in terms of hosting the emergency transit mechanism that is run by UNHCR, where asylum seekers and refugees, in particular vulnerable asylum seekers from, or refugees from that have been trapped in Libya have been transferred. And I know there have been examples of gender-based violence within these centers, and this is something that the European Union is extremely focused on. I know UNHCR as well, and they are forming partnerships with organizations on the ground to exactly counter this, because this is of utmost concern that this is going on in these places. I can only imagine that this will be the same if more of such structures are set up. Coming back to the question about local versus government structures, why don't we just support more local structures? I think from a government perspective, yes, I mean, we support local peace building and we want to continue to do so. But one of our main focuses is also on state structures, on institutions, because we believe that we cannot have sustainable peace in a country without supporting the state institution and rebuilding the social contract between state institution and the population. In some places, yes, it's very difficult, but I believe that always, I mean, in most cases, institutions to support, like judiciary, for example, which is something that we support in many places where we cannot, I mean, where other structures do not function, supporting election commissions, for example. I mean, there are always, I think, government structures in most cases that are worthy of support, and one of our main priorities is to rebuild the social contract between government, or not government, but state institutions and population, because otherwise I don't think, I mean, otherwise peace will not be sustainable, and only supporting local peace builders could then, I mean, lead to fragmentation, and this is not what we want. So
thank you so much, Nina. Elizabeth?
Thanks. I'm gonna answer the question from the colleague about how we did the local trust building work. I'm going to focus on the work that we've done in Darfur in Sudan as an example. As I said at the beginning, the primary implementers of the work we did there were local civil society organizations, but we at the same time established a committee of local technical local government representatives who were involved in every aspect of implementation of the project. So the civil society organization and the government representatives were jointly implementing the adaptation work together and were involved in detail in every part of the plan. And this was a deliberate step, partly because the relationship between the community and the government had been badly affected by the conflict that had happened. So it was an attempt to re-establish relationships around very practical steps. And what we found in that work was that both the community members and the government representatives reported when the project was finished, which was quite recently, that the relationships, both sides felt the relationships had improved and had become much more functional, much more free-flowing, and I think that was partly because each had played such a practical role in trying to ensure the implementation of the work. And I think that's also a critical part of the sustainability, that we were trying to reestablish those types of functioning relationships, both between different parts of the community, but also between community and local government.
Thank you. I'm going to answer maybe two questions quickly. On the question on the conflicts between national and local level, yes, there are a lot of tensions. For example, there are a lot of good, excellent public policies at the national levels, but they can't be concretely implemented most of the times. For example, in Colombia, it's known as a green champion for climate change policies. But when you go to the field, it's really hard to implement concretely the policies. It's the same, for example, in Bolivia. There is a lot done on the rights of Mother Earth at the national level, but then concretely, what is happening now? And on the other side, as I said, we had a lot of excellent concrete experiences from the communities that are not officially recognized by the government. So how we do connect both levels is really challenging and really important. And on the other question on knowledge, I think from a research perspective, we try to implement an approach of co-creation and co-production of knowledge to avoid having technical words, as you said, or a lack of access. For example, we had a project of a funding mechanism for water conservation with indigenous communities in Ecuador. And they are not talking about funding mechanism. They are talking about a plurinational water reciprocity. And so if we go talking about funding mechanism, it's not working. So it's really important to involve local actors, indigenous communities from the early stage of research projects to understand their vocabulary, their approaches, and not going with our expert approaches. No? So that's part of co-creation and co-production. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Valnora?
Thank you. I'll try to respond to all the questions because I think I can tie them up together. In terms of the local response mechanisms and how they can be supported, these mechanisms or the structures, they might seem informal, but they're actually structured and they're quite known to the government. So whether at the local level or at the national level, if the government needs to engage, they use these mechanisms as well. And they're recognized, they're known. So you have, in some rural areas, what we call peace mothers. You have what we call the Market Women Association. You have the bike riders. You have other youth groups, women's groups in particular, because you even have groups on adolescent girls, if you want to do sexual health, reproduction, and groups come together, whether on thematic areas or based on their, on whether they're youths or women or teenagers, and they're recognized. So we do not necessarily have a conflict there because they're acknowledged and they're known by the states itself. In terms of them having funding, and I think it's a good thing because we do have challenges when we need to work with some of these informal groups and you want them to own a process and you have all these rigid financial management system, which yeah, but in terms of funding, that there just needs to be that level of flexibility to know that they don't have bank accounts, they are not lettered, they might not understand all the little prints of the contracts. We have to read all of that, but there has to be that flexibility that we can access on their behalf, but give them the ownership in terms of implementation. And the last point about how women's group can get from the local level to the institutions like the African Union, we work from the lowest community level and we get to the policy spaces. So I'm part of the African Women's Leadership Network, which is an African Union and UN initiative. So whilst we get all the data and engagement and conversation at the local level, we also have the platform and the space to channel all these issues to a platform like the African Union because we interact with them directly.
Thank you so much. Last word to you, Jimmy.
Okay, thank you. I think I will start by saying the perception that civil society in the Global South has always had this disposition towards government and civil society rivalry, I think is an age-old practice. So one way you can really access credibility, legitimacy to see whether this civil society group or NGO is doing work both for government, local community, and international. We've seen it because I come from a background with colleagues who make their whole life and living on firing, without even acknowledging any positive thing. And the community would tell you, we don't want this. We want investors, we want this. Unfortunately, some of our colleagues come from what you may call Marxist background, and they have some attitude towards a certain group. So I'm just trying to see how we can pick some of the questions. So the new thing is working along this kind of coalition, or sometimes we work around platform, both national, international platform, and regional platform. So when we submit ourselves to this platform, our own local values, sometimes if you are working on animal rights or women's rights or rural rights, you submit to the issue of, for example, CSPPS. One of the values is inclusivity, participation, and all these kind of things. So then we have a common agenda when we're approaching the issue. So it wouldn't be that Jimmy is going to say, because I'm from the Platform for Dialogue and Peace, one of our values, our mission should be like this, and it should supersede the collective mission of the entire group. That wouldn't succeed. So this is how we try as much as possible. When we come to facilitation, we use those kind of values. Sometimes putting away our own respective personal issues in terms of how our institution works. And we see that this has really brought some really positive responses. Like I was just telling you about the research that was done on framework for assessing resilience, we wouldn't have known that communities have their own unique way of addressing issues if we are just going into a community with this conflict analysis framework. But it was through these kind of approaches, interpeace, or please, these are what the measures you have to use. We leave it with you as Liberians, but use these measures. And we go there. The term resilience, we have 17 languages in Liberia. We could not find it in one language. So tell me, climate change will meet that same challenge. You have to be able to create an atmosphere that people will help you to understand, provide a facilitatory forum that the language that you are using, people have to really think, okay, I think the issue of flood that affected us some time ago, for which I never have my farm, my produce, my crops. I think this is what people are speaking about. So we have to facilitate in a way that acknowledges local reality, but at the same time allow their own language to form part of your understanding. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So rich discussion. Wish we had much more time, but I've heard such interesting and innovative ideas and experiences being shared. So thank you so much for coming and sharing that with us, and thank you for all of us for joining us for this session. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you so much.